It's a situation that's now being called a human tragedy and a humanitarian crisis. What's the current situation that these words describe? Find out on Talking with Henrietta, coming up next. Hi, I'm Henrietta. Welcome to the show. Thousands of children are coming across the U.S.'s southern border without adults to take care of them. It's a situation that's being called a humanitarian crisis. Some statistics show that the number of children trying to enter the U.S. has increased by 90% over last year. Existing shelters are said to be at capacity, and in California, Oklahoma, and Texas, many of these children are being housed temporarily in military installations. The U.S. Department of Justice announced that it will create a $2 million fund to provide many of these minors legal representation in immigration court. On this show, we'll talk about what is being done locally to address what even President Obama has called an urgent humanitarian situation. Joining me on the show are two immigration attorneys from Community Legal Services of East Palo Alto. Miriam Kelly has practiced immigration law both in nonprofit and private settings in New York and New Jersey. She served as the Kids in Need of Defense Fellow at the American Friends Service Committee in Newark, New Jersey, where she represented immigrant youth facing removal proceedings. Helen Beasley, who is seated on my right, focuses on providing legal services to youth facing deportation. Helen is an active participant in coalition efforts to advance the rights of immigrants and youth in San Mateo County. Helen is from Canada, and like Miriam, she is fluent in Spanish. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's a delight to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
I mentioned just now that there's a 90% increase of young people trying to cross the border over last year. Why is that the case? Any ideas that you can share?
So just to kind of provide some background, this is not a new issue. This is something that really has been going on since 2011 or maybe even beforehand. Every year, the number of unaccompanied minors traveling from Central America, from South America, and coming up north through Mexico into the United States, that number has increased, doubled and tripled. I think at this point it's up like 400-something%, you know, but it's something that's been occurring steadily, and then recently there's been kind of like an increase in numbers, more so than other times.
So what's responsible for the current increase, and how is it that we haven't, it's now coming to our attention? For example, I don't think many people, even there was little if any publicity in 2011 when you said this has basically started, right?
Right. It's so interesting how like certain issues will come up into the media, and then one outlet will cover them and another one will, and then it kind of snowballs and people are like, oh, this just happened overnight. It really hasn't. I mean, this was been kind of on our periphery as immigration attorneys since at least 2011. I remember like in the early days of, you know, after law school, practicing and getting into immigration law and then having specialty with children. It was something that these studies were coming out, and there were different guidebooks and reports done by different organizations. I remember there was one by like the Women's Refugee Commission that was done like back in probably like 2011, 2012 that talked about these like root causes of migration and all the different statistics and numbers. And then just recently, even though this has been something that's been like steadily occurring, it's kind of blown up recently in the media. So it's not because it's something new has happened. It's just, you know, it's been steadily occurring, and I guess it became a priority for the government to provide some kind of funding or some kind of response, and then now it's becoming more of like an issue that people are paying attention to.
I guess because it seems like right now it's absolutely overwhelming.
We have seen, as you said, a 90% increase over last year in terms of the number of unaccompanied children crossing the border and being apprehended by Border Patrol. And I think one of the reasons that it really has come to light is because we've run out of space in the current shelter system to house these children. There is a system set up to make sure that the needs of these children are being met after they've been apprehended by Border Patrol, to ensure, since they are children, that their medical needs, psychological needs, and needs for education, for example, are met while they're in immigration custody. And so there's a shelter system put in place throughout the United States to house these children. But what we're seeing now, because there is an increase in the number of children, is that the shelters are overwhelmed, that there's not enough space for the children. And so instead of being put into a child-friendly environment with services for children, they're being housed for longer periods of time in Border Patrol facilities, and as you said, now on military installations as well, which really aren't equipped to provide services for children. And that's really, where we're seeing this urgent humanitarian crisis arising.
So I would even think, or some would even doubt, the adequacy of the provisions that have been used in the past to care for children. How adequate have they been in the past? I'm thinking even the homeless here, homeless children aren't necessarily given the type of care that they should get or attention to their education. So there might be even less attention given to immigrant children who've crossed the border.
Right, it's kind of interesting. Like, there's good and there's bad. So there's an agency in place to assess the needs of recent child immigrants that have come over the border. Rather than being handled by ICE, by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they're handled by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is part of like Department of Health and Human Services. So they have a special kind of branch of a different agency handling their detention rather than ICE detention. Because you hear stories of like ICE detention for adults, and it's pretty much in jail, and many of them are housed in county jails. So the good thing is that they're not being held in that kind of system. Instead, it's more of like a shelter system. And there are certain instances in which we'll have clients, for example, that come to us and we kind of hear about their experience of being detained. And it is a good thing sometimes that they've had like education for the first time in their lives. Sometimes they've been completely deprived of education in their home country, and sometimes they've gone to the dentist for the first time in their entire lives because those services weren't available to them at home. At the same time, these services that are provided to them, I mean, it's never enough. I mean, now that so many children are inundating the system, the push that we've been seeing is that instead of being housed for like a month or two, they're kind of, putting them in for like a week, 2 weeks, just to kind of shorten the process, because the shorter time that they spend in those shelters, the more different kids can be put into them, instead of the ones that are being like, the overflow is being put into like airplane hangars on the military installations. So it's just kind of been like a shift in how the children are treated. And the way that children leave detention is that they'll try to match them with family members. And so previously, like, a year or two ago, the kids would spend 3 months in the shelter because they want to verify that the family member that they're being matched to is somebody who's not going to harm them, and background checks can sometimes be completed, and they'll kind of look at who's living in that home and then make the decision that, like, yes, this child should be reunified with that family member, aunt, uncle, cousin, brother, parent.
How do officials usually know that there is a family member?
From the child, yeah. Yeah.
So the relatives that send the child.
Well, there's not really anyone that's sending them per se. That's kind of
Don't tell me that's a myth. And the parents, the parents aren't sending them?
Oh, the one thing that I really hope that we can talk about today is the fact that there's so many different stories, and children come here for a myriad of reasons. And it's not just that they're being sent, or, it's not always a pull, it's more of a push. So there's so many different root causes of that migration, but a common scenario that we see in our line of work is that the child is faced with like a desperate situation and needs to get out of their home country. And so they make the plans on their own. I hear over and over of parents that don't even know that their child is coming, that the child has been like, oh, mom or dad, can I come be with you? And they're like, no, it's too dangerous. I want to find you a legal way of coming. And then the child will make their own plans and borrow money from whoever and make their own plans.
No, we're talking about children at what age?
Anywhere from 9 years old, to 15, 16, 17 years old. I mean, there's...
Now, what about toddlers? We've seen a few toddlers, and we know good and well the toddlers didn't make the decision on their own and decide to crawl across.
Yeah, maybe not like an extreme like toddlers, but it's surprising to me that even a child as much as like 9 or 10 years old will make that decision. And, you know, faced with a desperate situation, human beings can really like push themselves to levels.
Now,
that
if
you
it's a
wouldn't think.
9-year-old child, and they're going to be reunited with parents in this country, are those parents legal, usually, or illegal?
Well, we don't like the terms like illegal or you know, legal. It's better to say
than alien.
yeah. Oh, I hate alien. Yeah. So I like to refer to them as having some kind of lawful status or being undocumented.
Okay.
So a lot of times the
Undocumented.
parents, yeah, you know, it's just sometimes the parents are undocumented, sometimes they are lawful permanent residents. You know, if there's some kind of legal means to get their children to the U.S., many parents will opt to do that, of course, because it's so much less dangerous and it's kind of opening up more possibilities for them in the future, and they don't have to deal with this undocumented problem. The problem is that our immigration system really is flawed, and people, you know, a common criticism that I hear is that, oh, they should just wait in line like everyone else does and take their place in the queue and then it'll get to them. But if you really look at the immigration system, there's no line to wait in. People who emigrate to the U.S. come for employment reasons, they come for family reasons. You have to have some kind of U.S. citizen family member petition for you. A common way of doing it is through a family petition. Those petitions can take 10, 15, 20 years to go through. And that's if they're lucky enough to have a family link to come to the U.S. So people always say, oh, just wait in line. Like, how are you supposed to wait in line if there's no line that you can even wait in, you know? So,
And you don't know where it is anyway. And
Yeah.
you don't know what number you will be, or...
Yeah, and even if you can get a number, I mean, let's say that, like, you know, there is no U.S. citizen family member, no lawful permanent resident family member to put a petition in for them, then they have to look for some kind of employment reason. That's like 1 in a million that'll work for.
Well, what Miriam is saying, it seems to me, is that when the government attempts to reunite children with family members here, the government knows who those family members are.
Yes, they do.
And they know where they are,
Yes.
whether they're documented or not documented.
Yes, they do.
Is that usually the case?
That is usually the case. And as Miriam was mentioning, normally it's the child who has to provide that information. So once the child is put into the shelter system, they have a case manager who's in charge of trying to find some sort of family member or other responsible adult to release that child to. And so they'll question the child, you know, who were you coming to live with? What were your plans when you left your country? Is there anyone here in the United States that you know and that you could live with? And based on that information, they start this reunification process where they investigate, okay, is this a safe home? Is this an adult who wants this child? Sometimes the child thinks they're coming here to live with someone, and then that person, either out of fear for contact with immigration and going through that process of revealing themselves to the federal government, or for financial reasons that they're actually not able to provide for that child, decide, you know what, we don't want that child anymore. And so then that puts that child in a very precarious situation of prolonged detention in the immigration system.
Now, while they're in that prolonged detention, I think you did indicate that there is access to education, access to medical care, and they're better off. And then usually what happens?
For children who are eligible for immigration relief, which many of these children are, there's estimates about 40 to 58% of these children are eligible for forms of relief that would allow them to stay permanently in the United States.
With parents or without?
Either. Really, it's 40 to 58% overall, and so some of those children are going to have parents and some don't. That's the overall figure. But for children who aren't able to reunify with a parent or a family member and who are eligible to stay here in the United States, there is a long-term foster care program where these children can be placed and they're living in foster care homes or group home setting with, you know, many more freedoms, fewer restrictions, or they're going to regular high schools. They're able, you know, if they are able to obtain immigration status, are able to work, for example, and send money home. So there is a system in place to make sure that kids who don't have anywhere to live, you know, don't have anywhere to be released to, are able to live in the least restrictive setting possible.
And what happens, it was stated that if they're eligible, under what circumstances would they not be eligible?
So there's
To stay.
There's various forms of relief, and when we screen children, we see if they're eligible for one of those forms of relief. So one scenario that comes up, I wouldn't say frequently, but sometimes, is special immigrant juvenile status. And that's for children who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both of those parents. And they need to have that determination made by a state court, some kind of court within the United States that has jurisdiction over that child.
Now, are those children who might have been abused before they got here, or we're talking about abuse while they're here?
It could happen either way. Yeah, sadly, and I see it happen both ways. So a scenario can sometimes be that mom and or dad has never been in the picture and the child was living with a relative, and that relative systematically abused that person. I mean, we see cases of sexual abuse, neglect. Then the child, out of desperation, flees to come to the United States, and then is, in the foster care system. So with the foster care system, a guardian will be put in place, and then that child can have a court order issued naming that somebody as a guardian, and then they'll be able to apply for special immigrant juvenile status.
If these children are doing this on their own, how do they know about the United States and possible freedom that this country might offer?
As we said, there's a number of different reasons and a number of different factors that influence children's decision to come to the United States. Some of them do have family members here in the United States that they are seeking to reunite with. A lot of times it's parents who might have left, 10, 15 years ago, and these children haven't seen them since then, and they're seeking to reunify with that parent or with another family member.
And those are the older children. They would have to be.
They tend to be the older children who are coming and searching for a family member. A lot of times what we see are clients who, even though the family member is in the United States, they maintain contact. There's regular phone calls. There are money sent home to help take care of that child, and the child makes a decision because the situation in their home country is so precarious. They make the decision to take a very dangerous journey to try to reunify with a parent or family member. Other children don't have parents or family members here in the United States, and it's more of, they've heard that America has all these opportunities, that it's a safe place where they can get an education, for example. A lot of these children have to stop attending school either because there isn't a free public school system past a certain grade, or because of fear of gang members in their neighborhoods, that they're too afraid to attend school. And so they've heard that there's many more educational opportunities in the United States that they wish to pursue. And so these are children making that decision that they want to be able to, have those opportunities and to live in safety, to be able to go to school and not be afraid to go to school.
Well, there is a lot in the press that gives one the impression that the children are being brought in by coyotes and it's all maybe drug cartels. Does that correspond to any of the information that you have or any of the children that you deal with?
Well,
and how valid is that information?
So coyotes and drug cartels, very separate. So many people who make the journey from their home countries to the United States, I mean, it's a long journey, and it's like
through the desert.
Through more than just the desert. I mean, you should hear like some of the stories that our clients tell us about how they got here. I mean, it involves planes. I mean, not planes really, but like trains, buses. People ride on tops of the trains. There's a lot of like industrial freight trains that will go through Guatemala into Mexico, and they'll ride on tops of those trains. They can't afford to buy a ticket, and so a lot of times they need somebody to help them through that journey, because if you get lost, it is the desert, and we hear of really sad cases of like skeletons being found in the desert of people trying to make their way north and they got lost and ran out of the water.
Usually we think of adults, but we don't think of children, and so now it's like we don't know how many children might have been lost in the desert.
It happens. There's so many deaths that are related to the journey up north. People also, those trains. I don't know if you've ever watched the movie Which Way Home. It's on Netflix. It's such a great documentary about some kids from Central America making their way up north, and it shows exactly every step of the journey that they go on, leaving their little hometown and then getting to the train station and going from one train to the next train and waiting while, it's safe, and if there's like rumors of like guards of like the, around the police around the train stations. They'll wait for a couple of days in these shelters. It's so fascinating just seeing like the different methods that they'll take to come through, you know. And it's not just adults. It's so many children.
Well, you had talked about the difference between the drug cartels
Right.
and the coyotes.
So I'm seeing like the correlation with drug cartels and people coming north is not that people are coming north with the cartels, it's that they're coming north to escape the power and influence of the cartels.
Ah, so they're not being smuggled in any way, paying off drug cartels.
We have seen some situations. For a lot of these cases, the children are brought to the U.S.-Mexican border, and then they're placed into, you know, safe houses or houses where they wait for an opportunity to actually cross into the United States. So they're waiting on the Mexican side of the border. And we have seen situations where at that point in time, there is a lot of drug cartel activity along the border, that drug cartels have taken advantage of those safe houses and tried to exploit those migrants and say, okay, well, if you want to be able to cross into the United States, you're going to have to work for us, or we're going to kill you, or we're going to kill your family members back in your home country. And so they're given very little choice. They don't have many options in that point. They're alone in this house. They don't know where they are.
Adults?
Children.
Older children?
Teenagers. I've seen it as young as 13, 14, up to 16, 17. It does tend to be teenagers in this situation that they're using to try to smuggle drugs across the border. And I've seen situations of kids who refuse to do so and put themselves at a lot of danger and a lot of risk when they're in the situation alone. They don't know where they are. They don't know how to continue the journey, but they also don't know how to get back. And they're stuck in this situation, and they have to try to strike out on their own and cross the border at that point.
So you said you've seen children, you've talked to children who've been in that position.
I have, yeah.
And how have they managed? Presumably they did manage.
I mean, they were apprehended by Border Patrol very shortly after crossing the border.
And they weren't immediately sent back.
No, they were not. They were placed into this shelter system. So for youth who arrive from Central America, they do have the right to go to immigration court to fight their immigration case, to present, you know, their case for why they should be allowed to stay or why they're eligible to stay and seek protection here in the United States. And so they're placed into the shelter system, which is where they're housed, but at the same time, they're having to go to immigration court, again, on their own, without a government-funded attorney, and try to fight their case to stay here in the United States.
Now, let's go back to the coyotes. There was mention of the drug cartel. What's the situation with the coyotes? And I assume that these are people who more or less are being paid to take them across.
Yeah, so it's a situation in which somebody expresses the need to go up north, and they do contract the services of a coyote to help them along the way. And a lot of times people will take out loans and just pay or they have a situation and it's almost like an indentured servitude that once they do make it to the U.S., they have to work to pay off that coyote. And they do it because they're really risking life and limb and everything they have to make it to the U.S. And having a coyote is kind of like a way to make sure that they're not going, you know, there's never any guarantee, but it's kind of like a safeguard that they can take, that they can come through and they're not going to get killed or get taken advantage of. Unfortunately, it does happen. You know, we hear stories about bad coyotes all the time who will like leave people stranded in the desert, or they'll rob them. They'll have like an entire group of people and they'll take everything that they brought with them, all their life's possessions, and leave them stranded.
Too.
Yeah, it's so sad. I mean, because we hear about these stories of like adults who are being led up by coyotes and, you know, being taken advantage of them, but with children it happens a lot too, and it's something that's just really like sad and shocking for us, like especially as immigration attorneys. When we hear about these kinds of stories, it's like really heartbreaking.
Well, I'm thinking it's all shocking.
It is. Yeah.
It's just unimaginable. Now, getting back to the question of what children would not be eligible.
Right, yeah. So one remedy I mentioned was special immigrant juvenile status. So let's say they're leaving their home country and they're coming to a situation here where there's two parents that are willing to take care of them. They're not necessarily eligible then because they haven't been abused, abandoned, or neglected necessarily. Another thing that they could apply for is asylum. Asylum is if somebody has a fear of persecution in their home country based on race, religion, nationality, social group, political opinion. If their fear of persecution is based on one of those 5 areas, they can apply for asylum. However, it's something that comes up with us all the time, that we perform these kind of like analyses on clients and do consultations, and we'll rack our brains for everything that they could be eligible for, and many times the answer is they're not eligible for anything. And it is a very big possibility because these forms of relief are hard to get, and they require an immigration attorney who's skilled in those areas of law, and even still, there's no guarantee. There's never a guarantee. There's always some kind of roadblock that could happen down the line. The immigration judge could say no and deny the case and order their deportation. Citizenship and Immigration Services can find that they're not eligible for this benefit and say no, and then refer the case to the immigration judge, who can then deport them. Nothing is ever a guarantee, and I feel like I'm reading a lot of things that make it seem like it's easy, that once they get here.
No, it seems like the whole process isn't easy at all.
Yeah, it's so difficult.
And one thing that's particularly difficult is a lot of these children really are fleeing for their lives, but a lot of them are fleeing from gangs and drug cartels in their home countries. We're especially seeing the teenagers who are either being recruited to the gangs and told, if you don't join us, if you don't help us, we're going to kill you, we're going to kill your family. We see extortion. If you don't pay us, if you don't get your parent in the United States to send us money, we're going to kill you. Or for young women in particular, if you don't become my girlfriend, if you don't join the gang in that way, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to rape you. And so these children are fleeing from that situation. But unfortunately, asylum law as it currently stands in the United States doesn't recognize that as a basis for asylum. Gang-based asylum claims are not winning in the immigration courts.
You would think if you're fearing for your life, just the fact that you're fearing for your life is enough of a case to make for asylum, and you're saying it's not.
Unfortunately, it's not, and these children, they're terrified. They're terrified of being killed in their home countries, and yet the law doesn't recognize that.
So have you had cases where children are sent back?
We haven't yet. We don't largely take a lot of asylum cases in our office. They're incredibly resource intensive, unfortunately, and for a small nonprofit, it's difficult.
Now, when you say resource intensive? Resource intensive.
Resource intensive. And for a small nonprofit, it is difficult to be able to dedicate the resources to those claims. There is an organization in San Francisco called Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights that focuses on asylum claims and that offers free legal services for asylum cases. And so they are advocating to try to get this recognized as a basis for asylum under U.S. asylum law.
I would think so. You know of people who've been deported? Children who've been deported.
Yeah, I mean, we can't speak from personal experience because we have such a limited bandwidth to take on these cases. So like one thing that I tell people, and they're kind of shocked, is that there's no right to counsel in immigration proceedings. So unless somebody has the good fortune of finding an attorney with a nonprofit organization who can offer pro bono services, or if they can afford a private attorney and pay thousands and thousands of dollars representation, otherwise they're on their own and they have to apply for these things on their own and litigate their own cases in the immigration court. And immigration law is so complex and it is so difficult to navigate, and asking somebody.
It just seems to me I can't say the courts are stacked against you, but everything seems to be stacked against you. I mean, if you're a child,
it's so difficult.
What are you supposed to do? I mean, I'm thinking it's just an incredible experience having to go through all of that just to get here. To unknown circumstances, and then you have to fight your way through in terms of immigration law and immigration court. And how is one ever supposed to know anything about the law? So, should one assume most are sent back?
Not most. I mean, also the other thing is that the immigration system is notoriously slow. So somebody will come in and they'll be held in the shelter for, let's say 2-3 months, and then they're assigned an immigration court date for like a few months down the line. Let's say that they're applying for some kind of benefit in which they're going to have a hearing in the immigration court. It's possible that they're not going to have a hearing until 2-3 years down the line. Yeah, it's just the nature of the beast, and immigration judges, there's never enough judges. Each judge has thousands of people on their docket. They have to set out these cases for years in the future. There's just not enough, I guess, funds with the Executive Office for Immigration Review to have a system in which people can have a speedy trial. Speedy trial is not something that comes up in the immigration context.
It's hardly something that might even come up with criminal cases.
Yeah, so
in the United States, it doesn't involve.
So if you can imagine, and that's like constitutionally guaranteed for criminal cases. So for immigration, it's just like, who knows what happens. So the reason that we don't have like, cases that we know that like we're deported, because a lot of times, even if we've lost at the immigration court level, there's levels of appeal. So these things can be dragged out for several years, So, but I'm sure that there are cases, we kind of have to cherry pick the cases that have relief so that we can meaningfully use our time.
So let's talk about the cases that you have and the type of immigration work that each of you is working on.
Sure. So do you want to talk about some of your cases?
The majority of my cases are the special immigrant juvenile status that Miriam was talking about before. We do see a lot of kids that unfortunately have been abused, abandoned, or neglected, and that can be either by one or both parents.
And how are they referred to you?
In a number of different ways. We serve the long-term foster care facility that's located in San Jose, and so a lot of those children in foster care are eligible for special immigrant juvenile status. In the shelter system, there are legal service providers that go to the shelters and provide Know Your Rights presentations and do short intake screenings. And those legal service providers will refer cases to us. So let's say a child is in a shelter in Texas, they get a screening down in Texas, that attorney will actually contact our office and say, hey, this child is being reunified with a parent or an aunt or an uncle here in San Mateo County. Can you meet with them and see if you can help them with their case? We also see cases referred by social workers, by schools, where they discover that this child is having to go to immigration court, and they'll say, okay, there's this organization in East Palo Alto that might be able to help you. So it is really in a number of different ways that we get these cases.
So you were saying in many times the children are abused, or so let's talk about maybe, is there a typical case?
I don't think there is. I really don't think there is a typical case. Every case is different.
And how many cases have you worked on?
Right now I have about 95 cases, and I'd say over half of those are children. And so
you were just now about to give an example of an atypical case.
An atypical case amongst my cases. A lot of cases we do see are abandonment, where a child, just one of their parents has never been in the picture, unfortunately, and so a lot of the times the child, one of their parents has abandoned them, the other parent might say, okay, I can't provide for this child in my home country. There aren't job opportunities here. I financially cannot support this child on my own, so I'm gonna come to the United States so that I can support this child. And they make the very difficult decision of prolonged separation from their child. Then the child, grows up, is a teenager, and really, is fleeing both from the instability and insecurity in their home country, but also seeking to reunify with that missing parent so that at least they have one parent in their lives. And so they'll come to the United States and be reunified with that parent. And those children are eligible for special immigrant juvenile status. So we do see that quite often. We also often see children who are living with an aunt or uncle or grandparent who don't have either of their parents available to take care of them. Neither of the parents can take care of that child.
So are these children mainly in East Palo Alto? Or in the area, Redwood City, San Mateo?
We serve San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. I see the majority of my cases are in Redwood City, San Mateo, and East Palo Alto.
Atypical cases?
So right now, like the kind of work that I do is for children who have been here a little bit longer. I work for, kind of like the Dreamer movement. People talk about the DREAM Act. It's actually deferred action for childhood arrivals.
These are children who might have been born here?
No. If you're born here, you're a citizen and you've got the golden ticket.
Well, I was just thinking DREAM Act children.
Right. So
are those who are born here?
No,
right?
no. So the DREAM Act, are kids who were brought here as children.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, this like big
Yes.
uptick in children that we've had going on here. So imagine like 5-10 years in the future, this is something that they would be eligible for. So it's for kids who have come here as children before they turn 16, and they've been here since at least June 15th of 2007 up until present day. And they have good moral character. They have either in high school or working towards their GED, or they've been honorably discharged from the military. So this was kind of something that there were so many kids that were brought here as babies brought here as young children under 16, and there was nothing available for them. And they felt American like in their souls, but weren't able to work legally, and they were undocumented, and they weren't able to go to college. It was a big problem. So in 2012, President Obama made an executive order saying that these children need to have something. So it's not a permanent resident status. They can't get citizenship through this. It's just protection from deportation and work authorization, meaning that they can legally work. They have a social security number. They're able to get a driver's license. So even though it's not something with a path to citizenship eventually, it's really changed the lives of so many different kids that are available, that are eligible for this. I have so many clients that thought they were U.S. citizens. They thought they were born here. They just never really asked about it. And then when they found out that they were undocumented was when they were thinking of college. And they're meeting with their counselor. And they're like, oh, how do I apply for FAFSA? And then the counselor says, what's your social security number? They're like, oh, I don't know if I have one of those. And then they go, I had one client that went home and asked his mom. He said, Mom, what's my social security number? And she was like, I have to talk to you about something. And he never knew that he was undocumented. And he was like, so because I was born in Mexico, I can't go to college? And she was like, unfortunately, it's going to be really difficult for you. So the DREAM Act, it was something that was being passed around in the House and the Senate that never really came to fruition, unfortunately. But Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, commonly called DACA, is what I primarily work on. And it's actually a really great opportunity for kids who want to go to college, who want to work legally, and want to get education and apply it towards a career in the future, that they're able to do so.
So you work on the bright side of things.
It's sad that that's the bright side. They could never be citizens from this, and there's still a lot of limitations, but the nature of the laws is the bright side, that they can at least stay here without fear of deportation.
So all of the cases that you've worked with, you've been able to successfully get documents that will allow students to work or go to college?
Right. It's still difficult to qualify for it. A lot of people come in the door and they think oh, am I eligible for DACA? And unfortunately they're not, because the requirements are pretty strict. If they came to the U.S. When they already turned 16, they're not eligible. They have to have come before their 16th birthday. So I have so many people that came here a couple days after their 16th birthday, and it's like, sorry, you're cut off.
So how does one know?
The way that they know is you have to show proof. So a lot of times you show that you were in the U.S. present through a vaccination records, for example, because the first thing they do when you bring your kids here, you get them vaccinated so they can go to school and they don't pose any public health risks. So their vaccination card is kind of proof, oh yes, they were here in 2005, and then the school records. So they kind of have to show through documentary evidence that they did arrive before their 16th birthday.
Well, we have heard, just as an aside, the IRS lost its records. So, in terms of a computer crash, could they simply say, we lost the documents, we don't have the documents?
Yeah, they could say that. They're going to get denied. It's not going to work. Yeah, it's just USCIS is strict, and they're going to look at everything. If they are not convinced, they will issue a request for evidence, a one last chance. Show us proof that you were here before you were 16 and before 2007. If they cannot provide that proof, they will not get approved for DACA. The case will be denied, and they lose their filing fee, which is $465.
Oh my! There is no place where you can go. I mean, there are. Well, I guess if there is, it wouldn't be something that would be public, where you can go and, college applications online, there are college mills. Mm-hmm. There is no mill someplace where one can go just to
No, even USCIS is strict about that. Now they're having an issue with people who go to high school online, the online high schools, and they must have a transcript or some kind of proof, if they're using a school, for example, that it's an accredited high school and that it's recognized by the Board of Education of that state. And they're very strict, I mean, USCIS uses so much energy in fraud prevention that we really have to make sure that everything that we're doing for our clients is on the up and up, and every document that we're providing to them is something that is true and verified. And these transcripts come to me from the school still with a seal on the envelope, so, and if we as attorneys ever had questions about the veracity of documents, we would not send them to USCIS, because that's a violation of, the client is doing something illegal, and we are not going to do something to help the client perpetuate an illegal activity.
So, for those students who cannot show that they were here before they were 16, what happens? And you see them.
I do. I have to tell them, I'm sorry, you're not eligible for this, and it's heartbreaking.
And they're already, I guess, undercover, so to speak. What's the word for it? That they're in the shadows.
Yeah, kind of like in the closet a little bit.
Yeah, in the shadows. So they simply go back in the shadows where they've been. And
right, and it's so sad. It takes so much courage for them to recognize that they're undocumented and to take positive steps to actually do something about it and try to become legal, try to find some way to attain immigration status that allow them to work lawfully in the future and to be here without fear. And for them to gather that courage and then come to me and I do a consultation and I see that I'm so sorry you're not eligible for this. It's a very difficult conversation to have.
And then they can't just go on and apply for citizenship because they would be automatically deported.
Applying for citizenship, you have to first show that you were a permanent resident of the United States. Like you have to be a permanent resident for at least 5 years or 3 years, depending on that. So if you were never a permanent resident, you can't apply for citizenship.
And a permanent resident means that you have the documents from the government.
The green card, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
You got to have that green card before you apply for citizenship.
So there is just no option for them.
Yeah.
But to leave the country and then apply, which could take, what, 10 to 20 years?
Or never. If there's no line for them to stand in, there's no way for them to ever come to the United States. They have to have some kind of employer that's petitioning for them or some kind of U.S. citizen, immediate family member who's going to petition for them, or maybe some kind of like non-immigrant status, some kind of visa. This is like a very tiny percentage of all the people in the world. It is so difficult to find a way to emigrate to the United States. I mean, if it was just a matter of filling out forms and waiting in line, then people wouldn't risk life and limb to sneak into the country and do it, through the border. So that's something that, I have a lot of conversations with people who are not in the field and they're kind of like surprised at how difficult it is. And it absolutely is so difficult and near impossible for many people. So somebody who's not eligible for a DACA, for example, they have the choice of go back to your home country and just try to start a new life out there and make the best of the situation, or commit yourself to a life of being undocumented and living in the shadows and never really being true with anyone about who you really are and having limited employment prospects. It's tough.
Well, I would think if you've managed to survive this long in the country, being undocumented, I would think very few would risk going back to another country, trying to come back in again.
You'd be surprised.
Really?
Yeah, I
really?
had.
I mean, if the situation is so dangerous for for thousands to come across the border to get away from what might be called life-threatening experiences, once somebody is here, why would they then go back? And you were about to say you've had.
I've had a couple of people who, they were still here. It's not like they left or anything, but they mentioned to me, they were like, I've done so much to try to fit my way into the immigration system and do things on the up and up and find some legal way to do it, and it's been so frustrating that I thought about going back to Mexico. And I thought about, I had a kid who was like educated at an Ivy League university and like somehow made his way through and was paying out-of-state tuition and did all these things, and he still said, if I can't find a way to work legally in this country, there's no point of me using my education here, and I should just go back to my home country and just try to work things out there.
So how long had he been here?
Since 2004 or something, like long time.
So he had lived in Mexico and he knew what the conditions were like in Mexico and felt that he had a chance in Mexico.
No, it's not that he felt like he had a chance in Mexico. He was like, why should I be in a place that doesn't want me? And also being disconnected from Mexico for so many years, he kind of maybe forgot like what it's like out there.
Yeah,
really.
I would think it would be very, very difficult since Mexico has its own restrictions. I would think for those who've lived in America for a long time.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you hear about people who, like people who get deported, for example. Let's say they've been living in the U.S. for several years, they go back to their home countries and they become a target, for the gangs and for extortion attempts. Because when somebody has lived in the U.S. for a while, people in the home country will sometimes say, oh, that's a rich person, we should hit them up for money and rob them. And if they're trying to start a business, they'll rob the business. And I hear about all these tragic things, so it's kind of like, it's an extra way of them getting persecuted if they do return to their home country.
Seems like it's a no-win situation.
It really does.
And I said that she dealt with the brighter side.
Unfortunately.
Observations and comments, and is there a bright side in what you're doing now?
There is a bright side when you are able to get legal status for someone, when you are able to get that residency and you can see how much of a difference it makes in someone's life. All of a sudden, all these doors are open to them. And I have, a lot of clients who then want to serve in the U.S. military, for example. They want to give back to this country. They want to be productive members of this society. And now they're given the opportunity to do so. And that's life-changing. it really is life-changing for them when they can see those doors opening and they're able to take advantage of all the opportunities here. So
and
that's
there are
the bright
people here
side.
who would think that there aren't all of those opportunities with the unemployment rolls being what there are, with more and more people falling out of the middle class, and there are these people who have, I shouldn't say they have nothing, but they feel that there are open doors. So how many clients do you have for whom you've opened the doors?
I can't count.
Ideally, you want to open doors
yeah,
for all of them.
for all of them.
That's the best case scenario.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've been doing this work for about 3 years now, you know, and I'm not sure how many cases, you know, have been successful. The majority of them have been, and as I said, it's just, you know, it's just so exciting to see that.
Talking about approaches to this situation, I read that there are no simple solutions, and President Obama is on record for approaching, let's say, Guatemala or El Salvador and saying that he would give, millions of dollars for them to change the situations in their countries. Do you see that this might yield results?
I mean, it's so complicated. You know, it's very difficult because I do think that efforts need to be made to improve the conditions in Central America, in the countries where the majority of these children are coming from. A lot of these children, they don't necessarily want to leave their home countries. You know, that's their home, it's their culture. They have family ties there. That's where they've grown up. It's not that it's an easy decision to one day leave your home and go on this very dangerous journey to the unknown. And so I do think it's important to try to improve conditions in the sending countries. But how to do that is another question. I mean, we're talking about years of violence, years of corruption, just a complete lack of opportunities, a complete lack of government institutions that can provide a safe and stable home environment for these children. That's not to say that we shouldn't try. That's not to say that we shouldn't try to look at the root causes of, okay, what's going on in these countries? And I do think each country is different. Each country obviously has its own history that needs to be dealt with and try to figure out, okay, well, where can we go from here? But I do think this is a long-term project. It's not going to change overnight. It's not all of a sudden that we're going to give millions of dollars and these countries are going to be safe and able to you know, protect these children.
I'm thinking right off the bat, some people might say, well, there are pockets of violence in this country. And if money would solve anything, or else the money hasn't been spent yet, but certainly I would think the money wouldn't necessarily be the solution for turning things around.
Particularly where you have high levels of corruption, particularly where you have, you know, just deeply entrenched, you know, violence and corruption. It's not easy to throw money at that and think that that's going to solve the problem.
So from your perspective, there are no simple solutions, but what would be some type of a step-by-step process for resolving the situation?
I wish I had an exact answer. That would be
even an inexact.
Fantastic. Yeah, even an inexact, even like 10 ideas would be great. Number one is that like you can't just throw money at a problem and expect it to go away. It needs to be a long-term commitment. The reason, I mean, people are coming for many reasons, but a lot of clients that I speak to say, I worked 16 hours a day and I got paid, you know, $10 a day. No matter how hard I worked, no matter what I did, it was never enough to put food on the table. That's why I came here. So really there has to be some kind of infrastructure put in place in which people can make a living wage and live off of that living wage, and also that the situation will improve from generation to generation.
People are protesting in San Francisco asking for a living wage.
Right.
Those are all over the country, and those are Americans.
Right. I mean, you have to put it all in perspective, you know? I mean, a lot of clients will say to me, you know, I spent 16 hours a day like cutting wheat in the fields, and then that made enough money for me to buy one avocado to share with my family of 4, you know? And then they come to the US and they'll work for 16 hours a day and they'll make, you know, $100. And it's just so astronomically so much more, you know, for the same amount of labor and like manual toiling. So it's,
but does that $100 go as far?
I feel like all of us, it's like no matter whatever we make, it's never enough. You know?
However, I find it very interesting statistics in terms of how much money is sent home.
Right.
And so you wonder, given the costs of living here, how people can live here and still at the same time send so much money home.
Right. I mean, it's just about like humble living is what it comes down to. I mean, I'm kind of like shocked sometimes about what I see with my clients and how they live. I mean, they'll live like 5 people to 1 bedroom, and they'll make all these like personal sacrifices, and they work every day. They never have any leisure time. They never have any time to relax, you know? I mean, it's the only time that they'll have any time to themselves is going to church on Sunday, you know? I mean, it's just like a work ethic and just like a need to provide support not only here but to people, the relatives left behind in the home country, that will make them just like work so hard. Like I kind of look at them sometimes and I'm like, I wonder if I personally could ever work that hard where I'm working like 3 jobs and I don't have any weekends, I don't have any vacation time. I mean, it's really the personal sacrifices and struggles that they make. I have such respect for that because that's the way. I mean, it's not like they're like working some kind of easy job and they have all this extra cash to send home. What they're doing is that they have their job 1 and 2 to provide for their rent and provide for their food and whoever family that they have here. Job number 3 is so they can send $100 a month or once every 2 months to their grandma in Mexico or in El Salvador and Guatemala, Honduras, who doesn't have any other way of living. There's no social systems over there providing for that relative back home. So if this person doesn't work those 3 jobs, that grandma or that parent or sibling is going to go starve in the home country, you know? So it's just, it's again, it's like desperation makes you really like do things that you don't think are humanly possible.
And also what we're seeing more and more is children, especially older teenagers, so 16, 17-year-olds who might be the eldest sibling in a family, feeling the need and feeling the pressure to come to the United States to work, to be able to support younger siblings back in their home countries. It's just amazing to me to see these teenagers with this work ethic and willing to make
So
these
you
sacrifices.
have seen them.
Yes.
I mean, they have gotten across the border, they have gotten with their files on your desk, and what help can you give them?
I mean, it really depends on the situation and if they're eligible for anything. You know, if I can find a way to get them a work permit, that can make a huge difference in their lives, being able to work legally. You know, again, yes, there is a lot of unemployment, but just being able to find a legal job and being able to be paid at least the minimum wage, that makes a big difference in terms of what they can send home to help support those younger siblings.
So for some people, a minimum wage is a tremendous thing, I guess, when you're starting with nothing. And
Right.
you risk your life to get here just to be able to get a minimum wage that might end up being far more than the $10 for 16 hours of work. So what's on the horizon? What's being planned from your end, or are there plans for your end in terms of improving situations on a local level?
So for me, with my line of work being deferred action for childhood arrivals, you know, the one for people who have been here for at least 5 years or more, for me, I just want to make sure that as many people who are eligible for this program are applying, because there's so many people out there. I mean, if you base the numbers of people who have applied for deferred action versus who you think is eligible based on the census, there's a huge gap. And you have to wonder, why aren't people applying for this? It's really something that can improve their lives and they can come out of the shadows.
Yes, but some say then the government knows who you are and where you are, and so you put yourself in jeopardy.
Right. That's why people don't apply. They're scared. You know, I sat down with a girl who said, I've been planning to do this for 2 years, but I've been so scared, and can you promise me that nothing will happen to me? And that's such a hard thing to say. So ICE, you know, people are scared of ICE coming to their home and picking them up and trying to deport them. So ICE has certain guidelines, and they're supposed to go after certain kinds of people. And, you know, they want to go after people who pose a risk to public safety, gang members, people who have felony convictions, people who are recent entrants, you know, those are supposed to be their enforcement priorities. So the comfort that I have to tell people is, you know, you're a student, you're somebody in college, and you have a clean criminal record, and you plan to pay your taxes in the future, so
and then
you shouldn't
do you
worry.
tell them that the immigration system works so slowly anyway that it might, if you do have a case that will be pending, it'll be several years before they get to you?
You know, honestly, like, yeah, that could be the case, but then sometimes things move quickly too, you know?
You never know.
Yeah, when you don't want them to move quickly, they move quickly sometimes, you know? Like if somebody already has a deportation order and they're in the US and they get picked up again, they're gone in 24 hours on a plane, you know, because they've exhausted their legal remedies at that point, you know? So, you know, can be fast when you don't want it to be fast. And, we have people, family members begging, please don't put him on a plane. And, it happens, unfortunately.
So is there something you're planning coming up in the next few days?
Yes. So we have a big event on July 1st, Tuesday, July 1st, in St. Anthony's Church in Menlo Park. We have this big event. So Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, is in its first renewal period because it came out in 2012 and it's only for 2 years. So every 2 years, people have to renew and pay that $465 to USCIS.
Goodness.
So we're doing a big push to make sure that people renew those applications, because if you don't renew and you don't pay that fee, you lose all of your protections and you lose your right to work. So we want to make sure that people are maintaining that.
So how are people coming up if they're students every 2 years with what, $400 and some dollars?
Yeah, $465. It's so tough. It's so tough. I mean, we were at a clinic a few weeks ago, and a girl was like, "Oh, I'm so excited to apply. I've been saving up this $465 for 2 years." And like every spare penny that she had, and actually her parents, she was in a wheelchair, but like her mom was like saving every penny that she had to put together for that $465. There's also programs like Mission Asset Fund has a fund in which they'll issue like scholarships, or they'll have a lending circle in which they pay for a certain amount of the fee, then issue a low interest loan for them to pay for the rest of the $465. So there are options, but it's a tremendous expense. Sometimes people will have 3 kids in their family, all who are DACA eligible. $465 times 3 times 2 every 2 years. You do the math. Yeah.
But if they're able to get jobs, they can at least make a contribution.
Right. That's what I tell them. It's like, yes, it's a tremendous amount of money up front, and I'm sorry that you have to pay that, but this deferred action is going to pay for itself.
And maybe
tenfold.
in a few years there'll be a complete overhaul of the immigration system.
That's what we're hoping for.
Last hopes. First hopes.
I mean, we do hope for a more permanent solution. The fact that this is a temporary program, the fact that these kids are having to reapply every 2 years, and that there are a number of children who don't qualify for deferred action. And there's their parents that we see at our clinics and workshops who aren't eligible for anything, and they are still living in the shadows. So we really do hope for a continued push for immigration reform, for comprehensive immigration reform, to help both the children and their parents, to help keep families together.
Anything that viewers can do that you would recommend?
Vote.
Please
vote, because immigration reform keeps failing, because if it'll make it past the House, it won't get through the Senate, and it's just been a stalemate. And it's really kind of demoralizing for us to tell our clients, because it'll be like in the news that maybe it's going to happen, and a few months back we thought that it was going to be in the pipeline and something was going to happen, and then it fell apart. And so there's nothing more frustrating for us as immigration practitioners, sitting down with somebody who really just wants to be legal in this country and wants to pay taxes and wants to be a law-abiding citizen, and telling them that I'm sorry, you're not eligible for anything. It's really, really demoralizing. So what we tell them is, please don't lose hope, hold out hope for immigration reform, that hopefully all of this time that you've spent being a good person and spending the time in this country will then be able to apply for some kind of remedy in the future to allow you to become a permanent resident and eventually a citizen. And so we try to keep their hopes alive about immigration reform, and then it'll fail in the House, So please, if you have these views about immigration and you feel like these people deserve a fair shot of becoming a citizen someday, vote.
Vote for whom? The person who says they're for immigration reform.
Ideally, yes. I mean, you want to vote for somebody who's going to represent your values as best as possible and as close to your heart, and maybe not everybody is as crazy about immigration and think as important as we do, but it is something. And I feel like people start to care about it more when they know somebody personally who's been adversely affected by this and whose life's dreams have been cut short because they're not able to apply for some kind of immigration benefit.
Well, I'd like to thank you for coming and sharing. Obviously, thousands of young children coming over the border is a catastrophic situation. It really is a human tragedy, but then you've shared a lot of what the whole immigration situation is about for millions of people in this country, and it's all quite tragic. So there's some light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully we're working our way there. I'd like to thank you again for being with us, and I'd like to thank our audience, our viewers, you the viewers, for watching. Until next time.